Good afternoon, everyone. This is Celia Lacayo, Associate Director of Community Engagement, and I also teach in the African American Studies and Chicano Studies, Central American Studies Department. Today, we are continuing the UCLA Rising Scholars series, where we have today Debanjan Roy-Chaudhary, who is a PhD candidate at the UCLA Sociology Department. Hi, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Wonderful. Well, your research is definitely making waves and really speaking to very important, relevant topics in our society today. Can you first tell us, how you arrived to your dissertation topic?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. It's a great story that I think speaks to my roots in Queens, New York, where I grew up and attended school all my life in the New York City area. And when I started at grad school at UCLA in the Department of Sociology, my first year, I didn't plan to actually return home for my dissertation. I thought maybe I would find a field site in Los Angeles, in California. I thought I was in a new place, and it just didn't occur to me. And actually, upon doing some research in my first year of grad school, I stumbled upon a very unique and interesting and tragic, but I thought a story that really needed to be told. And that was the story of 10-year-old Clifford Glover, who was a black boy who lived in South Jamaica, Queens. And he was gunned down by policemen, Patrolman Thomas Shea, in 1973. And at the time, that was the first case of a New York Police Department officer being put on trial for murder while on duty. He was eventually acquitted of all charges, and this led to protests and uprisings in the Southeast Queens area. And I had never heard of Clifford Glover. I had never heard of this officer who was tried. I had never heard of this trial, despite having grown up and attended New York City public schools for my entire life. And I just thought, wow, this was a piece of New York City history and really national history that spoke to exactly what we're experiencing, for the last several years occurring again, which is police violence, often officers not being held accountable, at least in the eyes of the public, and the public rising up and speaking out against these injustices. So when I came along that story and I found out that it occurred in the 103rd precinct of the New York Police Department, right there in Jamaica, Queens, which is the same place where when I was a youth, I remember the story of Sean Bell, the tragic police killing of Sean Bell, who was 23 years old at the time, and he was killed in a barrage of 50 bullets. Unmarked police officers, actually it was unmarked police officers in both incidents. And that also occurred in the 103rd precinct right there in Jamaica, Queens, where I had grown up all my life. So there was a story that I knew and the story that I didn't know. And I just thought that, well, if this timeline could somehow be connected between 1973 and 2006, where you have similar incidents occurring of police killings, similar outcomes where officers are acquitted of all charges, and similar outcomes in terms of people taking to the streets, I thought that timeline, that history of the community, a localized history, was so important to tell. And so that's actually how I arrived at my dissertation topic. Again, my first year of grad school, I approached my advisors and asked them, I said, well, is this something I can explore further? I don't know, what else is sort of out there in terms of, the data I should collect or the questions I should be answering or asking, but really my mind just kind of came upon this dissertation topic in doing that research and finding out that what I call sort of lightning striking twice, right? The same tragedy occurring at two different points in the last, 50 years. I just thought that story was something that needed to be told. And so I pursued that line of inquiry further and eventually completed my master's on that topic and then proposed my dissertation, which is titled Southside, We Outside, Policing and Placemaking in Historic Jamaica, Queens, New York. And now I have all my chapters that I'm working on and plenty of data to collect, but that is the story of the genesis of my dissertation topic.
Wonderful. And we can see many of those gems in this current publication entitled on Second Sight, Surveillance, and the Black Planet, Notes on a New Framework. Can you tell us the main argument and contributions of that paper?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for asking about that. So, the publication on Second Sight, Surveillance and the Black Planet, is really a theoretical framework for studying both ethnographically, but also through quantitative data, uh, the impacts of police contact, persistent police contact on young minoritized individuals. I focus specifically on New York City, being that that's my field site. I focus specifically on the experiences of stop, question, and frisk, which was a controversial practice implemented by the New York Police Department throughout the 2000s, but really was at its peak in 2011, before it was eventually ruled unconstitutional, and the practice of that is now decreased immensely. But I wanted to ask, from a theoretical perspective, what is the effect on racial consciousness and subjectivity of persistent police contact? And so I use Du Bois and the classic example of double consciousness, second sight, to kind of interpret and ask new questions about how we might use Du Bois's framework to analyze modern issues around policing, surveillance, and really racial stigma. So I focus on these incidents that I talk about in my dissertation, the police killings of Clifford Glover and Sean Bell in the New York Police Department 103rd Precinct. But I also focus on other police killings that are also of both historic and contemporary relevance. So the police killing of another 10-year-old boy named Ricky Bodden, who was actually from the country of Belize, which at the time was British Honduras. And he migrated with his mother to New York City, and he was gunned down by policemen in that same time period in the early 1970s. And that was in the Staten Island's New York Police Department 120th Precinct, which is the same precinct where Eric Gardner was killed in that tragic, now known around the world as the death by chokehold, by strangulation, in 2015. So tracing these origins of both the 103rd Precinct in Queens, which I studied for my dissertation, the 120th Precinct on Staten Island, which really captured the attention of the nation and the world in 2015, I'm thinking about the experiences of Black diasporic people as well. I think what's so unique about New York City, but also Los Angeles and other cities, is that we can think about racial subjectivity vis-a-vis policing and police violence through the lens of thinking about Black peoples across the Western Hemisphere, across the world, and other racial minoritized groups who kind of fall under what I think about as a colonial purview, right? And policing is something that comes out of a sort of colonial history, and that's why I talk about the Black Planet. That what if we think about the global ramifications of these sorts of regimes of policing, as well as other forms of governance and surveillance, such as immigration, airport security, other forms of securitization that, again, we know cause a certain racial subjectivity, a racial stigma. And I wanted to know, and I wanted to frame for my own dissertation, but also for other contemporary researchers, what does that mean in terms of the subjectivity, but also the agency of the people who are victims of those very practices? And I guess it's also relevant that I note that I myself was stopped and frisked at the tender age of 13. And that very much also formulated how I came to a lot of these research questions myself. So that's a little bit about the contributions of that publication. I hope you go ahead and read it if you get a chance.
Yes, wonderful. I have, and everybody should read it as it is a current, very relevant topic along with Black Lives Matter. I imagine that this also very much is found very relative with the students that you teach. Can you tell us a little bit about your teaching pedagogy and, further providing access to this knowledge to your students?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for asking about that. I've really had the distinct pleasure of teaching a lot during my time in grad school. I know for many grad students that can feel like a burden, but for me it's felt like an immense responsibility, but also a real pleasure. And I think that my, pedagogical philosophy is just that everyone has a place to learn in the classroom. And I really do feel that nobody should have to check their identity at the door, that we come into the classroom as our full selves. And that has really, really rang true during my experiences teaching at UCLA. I've had students who come from such a myriad backgrounds of folks who are veterans, folks with disabilities, folks who are have children, folks who are commuting, community college transfer students, you name it. Really, every type of different background and identity has shown up in the classroom. And I think that has just made for such an enriching class environment and educational environment. And for me, the most fun part about it is, we spend so much time in grad school learning, writing, thinking, reading, rethinking, rereading, rewriting. But when you're in the classroom, you really get to share that with a bunch of folks who are coming with so much eager curiosity for that knowledge, and just to share, some of the readings that I myself have fallen in love with, and share them through lectures, through discussion sections, and then hear back from the students. Well, what do you think? What issues did you have with this author's argument, or what do you think is missing, or how does this relate to your own life, your own experience? Has really just been the honor of a lifetime, and I'm really excited to potentially continue that work as a faculty member in the near future.
Well, our last question for you today, can you let us in on where your research is taking us? What kind of future projects are underway for you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm working on finishing up my dissertation, which is, again, focusing on that historical timeline that I mentioned earlier on. What I'm doing right now, and what I hope to continue doing in the future, is really critical quantitative research on policing and police misconduct. So I have the great privilege of working in New York City, which is actually the city in the country with, I would argue, the most transparent data on policing currently. So what that means is we have the full stop and frisk database with every single stop and frisk that has been conducted since 2006 onward. It's geolocated, so I use GIS spatial analysis to really look at, again, my specific field site and see, well, what are the patterns? Where are people being stopped? Who are those individuals being stopped? What are they being accused of? And how often are these stops actually resulting in arrests? How often are those stops resulting in use of force? And that's just a real kind of gold mine of data to work with. And the other data set that I'm working on is it's just been released in 2020 amid the worldwide protests through the repeal of 50A, and it unsealed thousands, hundreds of thousands of police misconduct records dating back to 2000. And that just allows us to see, what are officers being accused of in terms of alleged misconduct? How often are those accusations either substantiated or unsubstantiated, or how often are officers exonerated of all charges, and how often are charges actually translated into discipline from the higher up? So I'm really interested in working on critical quantitative data analysis going forward. Much of my dissertation focuses, again, historically on archival sources. My master's paper focuses on critical discourse analysis of news sources coming from both black and white press. So I look at the New York Times and the New York Amsterdam News. And I do hope to do more critical discourse analysis going forward. But I'm really looking forward to shifting my methodological focus a little bit and doing some really critical quantitative work on policing, police misconduct, and how that intersects with race, gender, and class, as well as space and place.
Again, thank you for your time. And as you can see, these are very bright rising scholars at UCLA, and we can see here with this amazing research. So again, this is Celia Lacayo with LA Social Science, and we will catch you next time. Thank you.